She was standing at the altar, dressed in white lace worth more than most people earn in a lifetime, about to marry one of the wealthiest men in Lagos. The cameras were flashing, the guests were smiling, everything was perfect. But then she saw him, standing in the back of the church, the man she thought was dead, the man whose heart she broke 7 years ago. And when the choir began to sing, she heard his voice, clear as day, echoing through the chapel. That's when she realized that some debts can never be paid with money, some ghosts never stay buried, and some love stories don't end with death. They end with a reckoning. This is the story of a woman who had everything except peace. A woman who climbed her way out of poverty and into penthouse suites on Victoria Island, designer gowns, and society galas. But on the day she was supposed to begin her new life, her past came back to remind her of the one person she left behind, the one person she never said goodbye to, the one person who loved her when she had nothing. His name was Easy, and this is what happened when he returned. Who was he, the man she betrayed? Why did he come back on her wedding day? And what secret did this golden bride try so hard to bury? Tonight you'll hear a story of love, guilt, and the one thing money can never buy: forgiveness. Her name is Adana Okafor now, but back when this story begins, she was just Adana, a 22-year-old waitress working double shifts at a small restaurant in Surulere. She lived in a cramped one-room apartment with peeling paint and a ceiling fan that only worked when it felt like it. She had no family to speak of. Her mother had passed away when she was 19, and her father had abandoned them years before that. Adana was alone in the world, working herself to exhaustion just to keep the lights on. But she had a dream. She wanted more than this. She wanted a life where she didn't have to check her bank account before buying a bag of rice. A life where she could breathe without the constant weight of rent and debt pressing down on her chest, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get there. That's when she met Ize. He was a music teacher at a local secondary school in Yaba, 25 years old, with kind eyes and a smile that made her feel like maybe the world wasn't so harsh after all. He came into the restaurant every Thursday evening, always ordered the same thing, jollof rice and fried plantain with a bottle of malt, and always left her a generous tip, even though she knew he didn't have much money either. One night he stayed after closing time and helped her arrange chairs while she cleaned tables. They talked for hours. About music, about dreams, about the lives they wished they could live. He told her he was saving up to open a community music school for children who couldn't afford lessons. She told him she wanted to go back to university and study business management. He believed in her. He looked at her like she was capable of anything. And for the first time in a long time, Adana felt seen. They started dating a few weeks later. It wasn't glamorous. They couldn't afford fancy restaurants in Ikoyi or weekend trips to Calabar. Their dates were walks along the beach at Elegushi, homemade meals in her tiny apartment, late-night conversations on her balcony while the sound of generators hummed in the distance. But it was real. Easy wrote her songs on his old guitar. He played them for her on Sunday mornings while she made akara and pap in her small kitchen. He told her she was beautiful even when her hair was tied in an old scarf and she was still wearing her waitress uniform. He loved her, not for what she could be, but for who she was. And Adana loved him too. At least she thought she did. But love, when it's tested by hunger and fear, doesn't always survive. Adana's landlord raised her rent. Her phone got stolen. She fell sick and missed a week of work and nearly lost her job because of it. The walls started closing in. Every night she lay awake staring at the stained ceiling, calculating how many more months she could keep this up before everything fell apart. And Eze, sweet, kind, hopeful Ease, didn't understand. He told her it would be okay. He told her they'd figure it out together. He told her that love was enough. But Adana knew better. She had been poor her entire life, and she knew that love didn't pay the rent. Love didn't put food on the table. Love didn't keep the lights on when the electricity bill was overdue. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Then she met Tobechukwu Nwosu. He was 42 years old, a real estate developer with properties all over Lagos, from Lekki to Banana Island. His portfolio was worth hundreds of millions of naira. He came into the restaurant one afternoon with a group of business associates, and when Adana brought him his order, he looked at her like she was the most interesting thing in the room. He asked for her number before he left. She didn't give it to him, but he came back the next day, and the day after that. And eventually, Adana said yes, not because she loved him, not because she was attracted to him, but because he represented everything she had ever wanted: security, stability, a way out. Tobechukwu didn't just offer her a relationship, he offered her a life. He told her he could take care of her. He told her she'd never have to worry about money again. He told her she deserved better than working herself to death in a restaurant. And Adana, exhausted and desperate and terrified of ending up back where she started, believed him. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. She broke up with Easy on a cold, rainy evening in November. She told him she couldn't do this anymore. She told him she needed more than what he could give her. She told him he deserved someone who could be happy with simple things, but that person wasn't her. Eze didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just looked at her with those kind, devastated eyes and asked her one question. "Do you love him?" Adana lied. She said yes. She said she was sorry. She said she hoped he'd find someone who could make him happy. And then she walked away. She didn't look back. She told herself it was the right decision. She told herself Eze would move on. She told herself she was doing what she had to do to survive. But late at night, when Tobechukwu was asleep beside her in his king-sized bed in his Victoria Island penthouse, Adana would lie awake and wonder if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. 3 months later, she heard the news. Eze was dead. A car accident, they said. He'd been driving home late one night after a school music concert when his car skidded off 3rd Mainland Bridge. He died instantly. Adana didn't go to the funeral. She told herself it would be inappropriate. She told herself Tobechukwu wouldn't understand. She told herself it was better this way. But the truth was, she couldn't face it. She couldn't face the people who had known them as a couple. She couldn't face his mother, who had always treated her like family. She couldn't face the fact that the last conversation she'd ever had with Eze had been a lie. So she stayed away. She buried her guilt as deep as she could and focused on building her new life. She married Tobechukwu 6 months later. She changed her name. She moved into his world of charity galas and private jets and vacation homes in Dubai and London. She became Mrs. Adana Nwosu, the perfect wife, the perfect socialite, the woman who had everything. But she never forgot Eze. She never stopped hearing his voice in her head, asking her that one question. "Do you love him?" 7 years passed. Adana's life with Tobechukwu was comfortable, even luxurious, but it was also hollow. She had everything she thought she wanted, but she felt nothing. Tobechukwu was kind to her in his own way, but their marriage was more of a business arrangement than a love story. He was busy with his work, traveling constantly between Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt, closing deals, expanding his empire. Adana filled her days with charity work and social events, playing the role of the devoted wife, smiling for the cameras at Owambe parties, making small talk with people she didn't care about. She was good at it. She had learned how to wear the mask so well that sometimes she forgot it was even there. But every now and then, late at night, she'd find herself thinking about Eze, wondering what he would have thought of the woman she'd become, wondering if he'd be disappointed, wondering if he'd still recognize her. Then Tobechukwu proposed something unexpected. He wanted to renew their vows, a big, elaborate ceremony to celebrate their 7th anniversary. He said it would be good for his image, good for their brand. Adana didn't want to do it, but she didn't have a good reason to say no. So she agreed. They planned the event for months. Tobechukwu spared no expense. They rented out the Cathedral Church of Christ on Marina, one of the most prestigious churches in Lagos. They hired the best wedding planner in the city, a famous florist, a caterer who had cooked for presidents. The guest list included politicians, oil magnates, Nollywood celebrities. It was going to be the social event of the year. Adana went through the motions, picking out a custom dress, approving the menu, rehearsing her vows. But inside, she felt like she was watching someone else's life unfold. The day of the ceremony arrived. It was a perfect November afternoon. The church was decorated with white roses and gold accents, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. The guests arrived in convoys of Range Rovers and G-Wagons, dressed in the finest aso-ebi and designer agbada. Adana stood in the bridal suite, staring at herself in the mirror. Her dress was custom-made, encrusted with tiny Swarovski crystals. Her hair was styled in soft waves with a diamond tiara. She looked like royalty. But when she looked into her own eyes, she saw a stranger, a woman who had traded her soul for security. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock. At 3:45, Adana was escorted to the entrance of the church. Her hands were shaking. The wedding planner gave her a signal. The doors would open in 30 seconds. Adana took a deep breath, clutching her bouquet of white orchids. And then the doors swung open. The church was breathtaking. Hundreds of candles flickered along the aisle. The choir stood at the front near the altar. Tobechukwu was waiting for her, smiling. The guests turned to look at her. Adana took her first step down the aisle. And that's when she saw him. Eze. He was standing at the very back of the church, near the last row of pews. He wasn't dressed like the other guests. He was wearing the same worn shirt he used to wear. His face was pale, almost translucent, and he was looking right at her. Adana's breath caught in her throat. She blinked hard, trying to convince herself she was imagining things. But when she opened her eyes, he was still there, still watching her. She tried to keep walking, but her hands were trembling so badly that she dropped her bouquet. It hit the marble floor, white petals scattering. The guests gasped. The music faltered. Tobechukwu's smile faded. Adana bent down to pick up the bouquet. When she stood up again, she looked back. He was gone. Just gone. Like he had never been there at all. She forced herself to smile and continue down the aisle. But she knew what she had seen. She made it to the altar somehow. Tobechukwu took her hand, but Adana barely felt it. She was trapped in a memory she had spent 7 years trying to forget. The officiant began to speak about love and commitment. Adana heard the words, but they didn't register. She was thinking about ease, about the way he used to look at her, about the last time she saw him, the night she broke his heart, about the news of his death. She had convinced herself that she had moved on. But standing here now, Adana realized the truth. She had never let him go. The officiant asked Tobechukwu to say his vows. Tobechukwu spoke confidently, his words polished and rehearsed. The guests nodded approvingly. Then it was her turn. She had written her vows weeks ago, safe and carefully worded. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say a word, the choir began to sing. It was supposed to be a hymn, something traditional. But the melody that filled the church was different. It was a song Adana knew, a song she hadn't heard in 7 years, a song Eze had written for her. The notes were unmistakable, soft and haunting, wrapping around her like a memory. Adana's heart stopped. She turned toward the choir, searching their faces, and then she heard it. His voice, clear and unmistakable, rising above the others. It was Eze. She knew his voice the way she knew her own name, but that was impossible. Eze was dead. He had been dead for 7 years. Adana's knees buckled. Tobechukwu caught her. "Adana, are you okay?" She couldn't answer. She couldn't breathe. All she could do was stare at the choir. But when she looked at them, they were all singing together, nothing out of the ordinary. There was no one who looked like Eze, and yet she could still hear him. His voice threaded through the harmony like a ghost. The song ended. The church fell silent. Tobechukwu whispered something to the officiant, who suggested they take a brief pause. Adana was led to a side room. Tobechukwu closed the door. "Adana, what's going on? Are you sick?" Adana shook her head. "I just felt dizzy. I didn't eat much this morning. I'll be okay." Tobechukwu studied her, then nodded. "All right. But if you need to stop, we can reschedule." No, I'm fine. Let's just get through this." As soon as Tobechukwu left the room, Adana sank into a chair, shaking. She told herself she was losing her mind, but she didn't believe it. She knew what she had seen, she knew what she had heard, and she knew Eze had come back. The ceremony resumed. Adana said her vows. Tobechukwu said his. They exchanged rings. The guests applauded. But as they walked back down the aisle, Adana's eyes scanned the crowd. And there, near the entrance, partially hidden by a column, was Eze. He wasn't looking at her. He was just standing there. And then he turned and walked out of the church. She wanted to run after him, but she couldn't. Not with hundreds of people watching. So she kept walking, kept smiling, kept pretending. The reception was held at the Echo Hotel ballroom. The guests danced and drank champagne. Adana moved through the crowd like an automaton. She couldn't stop thinking about Eze. She needed answers. As the evening wore on, Adana slipped away. She found a door that led outside to a terrace overlooking the lagoon. The cool night air hit her face. She stood at the railing, staring out at the lights of Lagos. Then she heard footsteps. She turned, expecting to see Eze, but it was an older man, one of the hotel staff. He nodded politely. "Beautiful night for a celebration." Adana nodded. The man hesitated, then added, "You know, I used to work at a small church in Surulere. Years ago. I remember a young man who used to play piano there, had the most beautiful voice, used to sing for hours." Adana's blood turned to ice. "What was his name?" "Eze, I think." "Yes, Eze. Sweet man. Shame what happened to him. What do you mean?" The man shrugged. "Heard he lost his mind after some woman broke his heart. Stopped showing up to work. Last I heard he was living on the streets around Yaba, singing for spare change. Don't know if he's still alive. Probably not." The man walked away, leaving Adana standing alone, her mind reeling. Eze hadn't died in a car accident. That was a lie. The truth was, he had suffered. He had fallen apart. And she had destroyed him. Adana couldn't stay at the reception. She told Tobechukwu she wasn't feeling well. He arranged for their driver to take her home. But Adana didn't go home. She gave the driver a different address. The address of the church in Surulere, where she and Eze used to go. The church was old and small, tucked away in a quiet street. Adana stood outside for a long time, gathering courage. Finally, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The church was empty. The wooden pews were old and worn. There was a piano at the front, covered in dust. Adana walked toward it slowly. She sat down on the piano bench and ran her fingers over the keys. She closed her eyes and let herself remember. The Sunday mornings they spent here, the way he would play and sing, the way he looked at her. Then she heard it. Footsteps, coming from the back of the church. Adana's eyes snapped open. She turned around, and there he was. Eze, standing in the aisle. He looked older, thinner. His clothes were worn, but it was him. "Adana," he said quietly. Adana couldn't speak. She just stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "You're alive." Eze nodded. "Yes, I'm alive. Why? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think you were dead?" "Because I needed you to let me go, Adana, and you never would have, not if you knew I was still out there, still hurting. So, I disappeared." Adana stood up, shaking. "I'm sorry. Eze, I'm so sorry. I never should have left you. I was scared and stupid and selfish." "I know you did," Eze said softly. "And I forgave you a long time ago. Then why are you here? Why now? Why today?" "Because I needed to see if you found what you were looking for. I needed to know if leaving me was worth it." Adana shook her head. tears pouring. It wasn't. None of it was worth it. I thought money would make me happy, but it didn't. I've been miserable for 7 years. I've been living a lie. Easy's expression softened. Then maybe it's not too late to start telling the truth. What do you mean? Easy gestured to the piano. Play something. I don't know how to play. You don't have to know how. Just try. Trust me. Adana sat back down. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to press them. The notes were clumsy at first, but as she kept going, they became something resembling beauty. Ezzy stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. You see? You don't need to be perfect, Adana. You just need to be real. What do I do now? You live your life. You stop running from the past. You stop pretending. And maybe you find a way to forgive yourself. Will I see you again? I don't know. But I hope you find peace, Adana. I really do. And then he turned and walked away. Adana watched him go. She didn't try to stop him. She just sat there and let herself feel everything. The guilt, the regret, the love she had never let go of. And for the first time in a long time, she felt free. Adana didn't go back to the penthouse. She stayed in the church until dawn. When the sun rose, she went home and told Tobechukwu the truth, that she couldn't do this anymore, that their marriage was a lie, that she needed to find herself again. Tobechukwu was angry at first, then resigned. They separated quietly. Adana moved out of the Banana Island penthouse and into a small apartment in Surulere. She used part of the divorce settlement to start a foundation providing music lessons to children who couldn't afford them. She called it Easy's Promise. She didn't know if Easy would ever hear about it, but it didn't matter. She did it for herself, to honor him, to make up for the pain she had caused. And slowly, Adana began to rebuild her life. Not as Mrs. Nwosu, but as Adana Okafor, the woman who had lost her way and found it again. Years passed. Adana never saw Easy again. But every now and then, on quiet Sunday mornings, she would go back to that old church in Surulere. She would sit at the piano and play. And sometimes, when the light came through the windows just right, she would swear she could hear his voice, soft and distant, singing along, a reminder that love never truly dies. It just transforms. It just waits for the moment when you're finally ready to hear it again. So what do you think? Was it really Easy's ghost that Adana saw, or was it guilt manifesting in her mind? Do you believe people can come back to deliver a message? Or is it just our conscience trying to make us face the truth? And here's the bigger question. If you were in Adana's position, if you had chosen security over love, and then saw the person you left behind on your wedding day, what would you do? Would you have the courage to walk away from everything, or would you keep living the lie? How would you feel if the person you betrayed appeared at the most important moment of your life? Let us know in the comments. And if this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that it's never too late to choose truth, then subscribe. We'll keep bringing you stories that stay with you, stories that make you think, stories that make you feel, stories that remind you what it means to be human.